Welcome to Kettlebell Corner, where strength meets theory, where we talk to you about all things kettlebells. And today's deeper dive, I want to talk about science, Roger. You know all about science. You like it. Optimize this. Science says that. Well, we got to know how did it all shake out and what's real versus fake and what do we even talk about? You know, we've gone through this for some years and finally decided we should take an approach. I know you said earlier that good lifting science was if you could touch your elbows together, you didn't do enough chest, I believe. So that's proof. But hi, how are you, first of all?
I don't know. I'm good, I guess.
Okay, good. There he is. Good. He guesses. That's not science. But we started our journey out. We'll just be real quick. We started our journey out just kind of figuring it out. And then eventually you were like, hey, there's more to this. And you said it was physics. We kind of grounded our approach in that. Would you agree?
Yeah, I would agree. And you know, we're far from the first people to do that.
We're not the first people. Oh shit. All right. Well, why did we then?
we weren't trying to be interesting or neat or novel. Ultimately, nobody was answering my questions. And kettlebells, especially hardstyle kettlebells, they're full of a lot of dogma. A lot of great coaches who know a lot of good things. But when I ask questions and I don't get answers, I get aggravated. And a lot of these questions, I in order to figure out, you know, things like, okay, you should swing with your arms straight. You swing with your arms straight, then you're doing well. If not, oh, that's a T-Rex swing and that's no good. Like, why is that no good? Like, what are we really evaluating? Are there trade-offs here? Is there ever a time when that is good? What's physically happening to the bell when the arms are straight versus bent? So that's why we started looking into all of these things and trying to figure out in our own kind of nonsensical way, how can we make sense out of this really kind of mysterious tool that is really propped up by a lot of dogma and a lot of experience, a lot of anecdotal evidence, but isn't answering my questions. So that's
when you don't answer his questions, he gets aggravated. He's like the Hulk.
So,
you won't like him when he's aggravated.
So that's where that came from. And yes, we do have, I guess, in a sense, we have a science-backed approach. But you know, for me, this discussion is relevant, especially now we have AI, which is very, very common. You can go to, you know, any one of these AI engines and what do you call it? AI bots? What are we calling these things now?
I don't know. I guess models.
Okay.
Sounds fancy.
Cool. So you go into one of those and you can type in some questions, and will you get a workout? Yeah. You know, is it spitting out things that don't make sense? Yeah. It's also spitting out incorrect answers. And this is, you know, something I've done. I'll go in and I'll type something and I'll ask it a question. And I was like, I know that's not right. And I'll say, hey, I don't think that's right. And this is why. And it'll apologize and say, thank you for correcting me. So
they're very agreeable.
They are. But if the models think they're right, they're not going to agree with you. And that's my point, that this is great stuff, but it's a work in progress. And we live in a time where information is so contentious, and there's this whole big debate over whether, you know, what you're doing is science backed or not science backed, and it's rampant in a lot of other sectors of fitness, but I don't see it a lot in the kettlebell community, and that's why I think it's important to weigh in, because how do you move forward and make training decisions when you have, you know, you read all over, you know, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, you need to do X, Y, and Z, or you're doing this wrong, or you're doing that wrong. And there are people who want to make you feel like you're doing things wrong so they can convince you that they have the only right way, which just isn't true. So we want to move forward with some say, yes, science is good, but we want to distinguish between what's relevant and what's not, because a lot of the useful training science has been around for a long, long time. That's the stuff that we're using. We're not trying to be new and edgy. I mean, we're using stuff that Newton taught us a long time ago. You know, I'm not over here saying that we're, you know, using particle physics to get better at kettlebells. I'm saying I studied a long time in my awkward way classical mechanics to try and figure out how to apply it to kettlebells. So that's the stuff that we're talking about. What is the science that is actually useful? Because a lot of it is not.
That's fair. And I really do got to know though, Roger, straight arms or T-Rex?
You're not going to get me to answer that. But you know,
Well, what? Well, let's talk about what just real quick,
Sure.
if it can be done real quick.
Uh-huh.
Using the physics, what kind of different result could we get from a straight arm versus a T-Rex swing? Or
Okay,
can
so first of all, the second question is valid. The first question is nonsense.
I know.
I know you know, but I want to point that out to people that one of the biggest issues, you know, I like to blame people for their own stupidity. So when I talk politics and people want to blame politicians, no, I blame the voters because they put up with it. And I don't
Hot take.
blame I don't blame the fitness people for their nonsense. I blame the people for being less critical and asking stupid questions. So if your questions are what's better rather than what is better in this context, this is who I am and this is what I'm trying to do, it's your own fault. So second question works, the first one does not.
Good. Answer it.
So having straight arms does a few things. I don't even know why we're going into this. I don't even know that it's helpful, but
Just this will be helpful.
Going into a swing with a straight arm, one gives you repeatability. So if you have a habit of bending your arms to accommodate, let's say, a heavier bell than you could actually swing, you don't really know what your true capabilities are. So when you have an established end and an established beginning, which will change based on other physics and balance and things like that, it makes it easier to see where you are relative to some sort of, let's say, starting point or set point. So the majority of your, let's say we're doing swings, right? I think that's what you asked me about.
Yeah, let's do swings.
So the majority of swings with, let's say, you know, two adult males, that's what we are allegedly. We're doing swings with anything from like a 16 kilo bell to a 40 kilo bell. Those swings are going to look almost identical. Once you go above 40, you're going to start seeing some changes because the percent of the bell to your body mass is going to influence your center of mass, which will influence how you have to balance. That's when your form is going to start to change a little bit.
That's
Okay?
physics, folks.
So when we get into the straight arm, you have to realize that the bell covers more distance. The arc that it goes through is going to be bigger. So that is going to be the potential for more force because more distance means more force. That's if your force production capabilities stay static. It could be that the extra distance that you cover is going to make the bell actually harder to swing. Okay, so you're not going to be able to generate the force, and the velocity of the bell is actually going to drop. When you get into rotational forces, greater distance is going to mean greater angular momentum. So that's another thing that could potentially go up. That's going to make it harder. If you look at let's say straight arm versus bent. You know, again, when an analogy that helps people understand this is if I were to swing a baseball bat at you and I'm grabbing the handle, right? You don't want me to hit you. Where do you want to be if I'm swinging a bat at you?
I want to be far away.
Okay, so if there are two
close.
good options.
I want to be close.
There are two. No. The first option was the better option. Okay, you want to be far away. If I'm in California, you want to be in Nebraska. Okay,
That's right.
So, but if you can't be there, then
Debatable.
you want to be close. And the reason why you want to be close is the actual speed. Okay, the velocity at the handle. Okay, is less than it is at the tip of the bat.
Yeah, so it won't hurt as bad.
Exactly, because it's all swinging as one. It's all swinging as one object. But the end of the bat is going through a bigger circle. Let's call it that. Okay, its rotation is bigger. So if it goes through more distance at the same time, if it covers more distance, it has to be going faster. Therefore, it's capable of, let's just say, again, you know, I'm going in and out of all of this language. Let's just say it's capable of generating more force. So that's what you're going to potentially do. Your swings with straight arms are repeatable. They should be a little harder, but you can generate more force that way. So, you know, again, there are going to be some trade-offs, and these are things that you are going to want to consider. If you're looking to, let's say, do some bouts of endurance, and it's not really important to you, then let your arms go. Let your arms relax. If you're really just trying to keep the legs and the heart going, no big deal. If you've got issues with, let's say, your elbows or your wrists, keep everything bent because you're not going to expose those things to greater forces. I'm not really going to get into torque too much because ideally, if you're swinging the bell correctly, there's not really going to be a ton on your arms. There will be some at some position, so that would be another reason to bend the arms. But the point is, you should understand what the differences are between these two things, and then you can make your training decisions based on that. And that's the kind of science that I think is helpful, that is well established, even though some things with classical mechanics, Newtonian physics is not exactly right. It's still useful, and it's repeatable, and it helps us make training decisions. So that's the kind of stuff that I think is good that we can use and we should use. We shouldn't just say, whoa, the science-backed nonsense is bad. But there are other things. We were talking earlier about rep ranges. So what have you heard are good rep ranges? Have you heard numbers recently?
Well, it depends what you want to do, but I would say, if you want to do the hypertrophy, it's 10 to 12. If you want muscular endurance, you got to hit those 20 reps. If you want power, it's a couple. They're kind of all over the place, I guess, but it all sort of stems in, what are you trying to do? And
it does.
What sort of adaptations are you trying to have?
The ranges that you're giving are kind of the traditional, this is optimal for that. And
I'm a classic man.
When you look at some of the research that I've heard about, I haven't done, okay, when I'm looking at people breaking down studies, different thing, doing research versus hearing someone says this is what research says, because it's not the same thing. Mm-hmm. I've heard that hypertrophy can happen anywhere between 5 and 30 reps. Okay.
All right.
So, do I think that's true? Sometimes. I don't think it's true for me. And what I'll point out is, if that were true, so now I have a theoretical floor for hypertrophy, meaning if I don't do at least 5 reps, it's never going to happen. Okay. If I do above 30, maybe it'll help, but then I'm going to start seeing diminishing returns. So what's the point? But I'm more interested in that ceiling, or I'm sorry, in that floor, that 5 rep floor. So one interesting thing about kettlebell, specifically hardstyle training, is we like to do a lot of ladders, a lot of 1 to 5 ladders, and maybe we'll go back down. So if I'm laddering up, I do 1, then I do 2, then I do 3, then I do 4, then I do 5.
That's a ladder. You did it.
Maybe I do 5 again, then I go back down to 4, 3, 2, 1. If that's the case, then I've only done 2 working sets, because I've only hit that minimum threshold twice. I've also heard, anywhere between, I've heard sets per muscle per week. That can kind of be all over the place. A common number I hear is 10 to 20 is ideal. Okay, so let's say that number is true, and let's say I need to hit 10 sets per muscle per week. I'm gonna have to do a lot of ladders in order to hit that number. And I
safe to say you'll be on top of the building by that point.
Obviously. So I didn't do that, but I got really, really big when I started training for Strong First Level 2. And by those numbers, if 5 is my minimum, right? 5 is my minimum, then I didn't hit enough of those sets with that muscle across the week to make a difference. Yet hypertrophy happened. I got bigger. I probably put on, at least 10 pounds, probably closer to 15.
It was an accident.
Clearly, either that's not true or it's not true for me, but this is the type of science that we can be skeptical of. And there's a big difference.
Yeah, it's sort of like, at the same time, you could be, I like what you said there, it may be true, but it wasn't true for me. So each person can look at these sort of things through the lens of their own body. Because what if you do 29 and then you are injured forever, then you were like, oh damn, I didn't get my big bicep because I did too much. That being said, Roger, this sort of kind of segues into what we were talking about as far as the S.A.I.D principle. Mm-hmm. Specific adaptations to impose demands. Ha ha ha. Sounds so ominous.
It does.
But essentially, you had mentioned that there's kind of 2 extremes. There's the Just Get Strong camp, and then there's the Circus Act group. The strong people and the functional people. Let's talk a little bit about those, and and what how the said principle can be used scientifically
Well,
to get your results.
I think first of all, one of the things that I want to point out is that of when we're getting into training scientifically, the said principle is something, although it is vague, it is something that I think is relevant. It's a lens through which you can view your programming choices. Okay, so this idea, which is an example of science that I think we should pay attention to, says that if you want to grow a particular body part, if you want to gain a specific attribute, then you should be specific with the things that you choose. So if I want to grow my biceps, programming a back squat is probably not going to do much for that. Now, will I create a better hormonal environment? Yes. And could that be part of my training? It absolutely would be. But the point is that the mechanism is not, it's not a one-to-one. I do this and then that happens. That's going to be part of the other thing. So we want to be as specific with our training as possible. Okay. And I don't, if time is at a premium, I don't think that that's a bad way to approach training and approach this viewpoint. So we want to be specific. Now, what you were talking about is you have a lot of the strength people who say if you want to get better at anything, get better at strength. And I don't think that's a bad way to look at things. I do think that it's a bit extreme. You get some people like I've heard Mark Ripto with starting strength, like those guys. They're very absolute in the way that they state things, which has its utility. He's taught a lot of people how to be strong. He's taught a lot of people how to lift in a particular way that works for a lot of people. Okay, so let's get that out of the way. But if your answer to everything is strength, always, that theory is going to break down after a certain point. And in fact, if you wanted to get faster and all you needed to do was get strong, then why are powerlifters not the fastest people on the planet?
Yeah, why did it take me 6 hours to run a marathon? You know what I'm saying?
So that's a
and why does my pickleball game suffer from my strength?
So that's a ridiculous example, but it's a ridiculous example based on a ridiculous example. Right, so you when you look at the top tier coaches, what people are actually doing is let's say you have world class sprinters. They're getting really strong, but they're not training like power lifters. You need to maintain some ability to move, and at a certain point, strength becomes its own attribute. And powerlifters are built a particular way. Strongmen are built a particular way, and your body will physically change to accommodate lifting, and you will no longer be able to run anymore.
Or wipe your butt, perhaps.
Yeah, at least not in the same way. And that doesn't mean that you can't get very, very strong and be very, very fast, because you look at anybody in the NFL, they probably have both things. But there are trade-offs. So that's one extreme where it's like, oh, well, just do these lifts and these lifts, and that's probably a little too reductive. And then you get the other people on the other end where everything is hyper functional, and it's mimicry. Oh, if you're a boxer, then I'm gonna have you do
punch a kettlebell.
Exactly. That's also nonsense. So when we're looking at the said principle, we need to pull things out, and we think about movement qualities. Okay, when we're looking at a movement, we're looking at, okay, what part of the body is it stressing, because that's what this is all about. We're imposing stress, okay, in order to cause those adaptations. So are we causing stress in the right area? Does it happen with a sufficient load, right? Because we're trying to gain strength and we haven't hit an adequate percentage of your maximum lift. I'm not going to put weight on my deadlift by doing a body weight hinge. It's just not going to happen. Okay, I'm going to need to lift heavy things at this point. Now, if I were a brand new lifter, yes, that might help me, but not at this point. So
right.
It's going to need to tax the right part of the body with the right load, a sufficient load. The answer to what is the right load, there are many answers, but it needs to at least hit a minimum threshold. I'm going to need to move at the right speed for the right period of time. So if I'm trying to going back to I'm trying to put some pounds on my deadlift. What's your workout today? Oh, I'm doing body weight hinges. I'm getting my butt against the wall. Oh, how many are you doing? Oh, I'm doing 14 sets of 5,000. Okay, I'm not going to. I might get sore, right? But I'm not going to be able to
bored.
I'm not going to be able to put weight on the bar doing that. And so you want to pull out these movement qualities, and that's how I think you should use the S.A.I.D principle. It doesn't mean that you have to look, exactly like the thing you're trying to do, right? Punching kettlebells and hooking up cables and all kinds of weird, swinging, 40-pound baseball bats. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is you need to pull out the movement attribute that you need. So, for example, if I am a fighter, right, and I need to be stronger, then I'm going to use the S.A.I.D principle and say, well, wait a second, my foundation is going to be right around my hips and my legs. Let me do some deadlifts. Let me do maybe some testing. And I think there's a little deficit in strength here. So if I've got a heavyweight fighter, for example, who is only able to pull 250 pounds off the ground, I think that's a strength deficit, because I think that's extremely light for a competitive athlete. So I'm going to do that safely, but I'm going to say, okay, I need to get more limit strength. So I'm going to do a specific exercise. Maybe I'm going to do a deadlift or a hex bar deadlift, something like that. I'm not going to do a kettlebell swing. Kettlebell swings might help, but that's not going to be very specific. So this is the type of science that I'm talking about, is using things that we know work. And we know that looking at exercise through this lens is effective, as long as we don't distort it into one extreme or the other.
Yeah, extreme like kettlebell flow. What are those good for, scientifically speaking?
So this is another interesting thing, and this gets down into the S.A.I.D principle as well. And you ask people, like, I have interactions with people, and if they want to do kettlebell flow, that's totally fine with that's totally cool. But he's like, oh, I train with kettlebells too. I do kettlebell flow. Like, okay, well, then you don't train with kettlebells. You use kettlebells, and they might get you stronger as a byproduct of the exercise that you do, but you're not training. You are either a kettlebell flow is spontaneous, okay, so it's not planned.
Well, I think that's the number one thing, right?
So you don't know what it is you're doing. It's a happy accident, or it's highly choreographed, and you're adding a lot of complexity that ignores making good training decisions to achieve a particular objective. Now, if you're training to get better at kettlebell flow, then yes, you're training. I take that back. But if you're looking to do anything else with these movements, then that style of kettlebell lifting doesn't do things specifically. And that's really what we want to get a little more specific with our training. So can it give you some benefits? Sure. And if you do it and you enjoy it, then by all means do that. But if you want to get something very specific, then you're going to have to get a little more. You're going to have to get specific. A little more specific with things, and that's really what I'm talking about.
Yeah, and I think you kind of touched on it, so let's talk a little bit about it. But with something like the flow, and then something as far as getting stronger, the flow is going to add a lot more complexity to your movements. So you're thus probably going to have to use a lighter bell, and oftentimes that's typically the case with those type of sessions. And then if you're wanting to build that strength, you need to have a significant load. So what are some I guess let's establish some basic percentages, or maybe you've heard some, or you have some ideas of some that are kind of like good things to look at when you're making an informed decision, whether it's our information or you look it up and the studies say what their information should be.
Sure. So two things to point out. So one is, yes, there's an inverse relationship between complexity and intensity. So the more complex a movement gets, the less intense it's going to get. And by that, usually we mean you can't lift as much or you can't lift as fast. And those are two mechanisms that we can use to get strong, right? That those are two mechanisms that can help us get strong in specific ways. So the complexity is a problem. So we're going to want to use simpler movements if that's what we want to do, if we want to get strong. As far as percentages go, I have seen numbers all over the place, but usually the bottom end is right around 65%. And that's a 65%
of a maximum.
Of a maximum effort. So why I like information like this is it's very easily testable. You can pull out your calculator. You can, there are charts and graphs that other people have used. You can do your own testing. You can do like a 10 rep max or a 5 rep max, and then use the chart. Is it going to be right? No, it's not, but it's a starting point. So
yeah, if that's what you got, that's what you got.
Sure. And if we're getting into to science-backed training, I'm not talking about studies. I'm talking about actually using science, and science is about testing theories, right? Is this working? Is this going to work, or is this not going to work? So we can find that 65%. We can use it, and then it's a binary. Did it work or did it not work? We have something that we're measuring for, and if it's a particular number of reps or if it's a particular load, we can test that against what we've been doing. And as long as we're diligent in what we're doing, I tell my clients this all the time, you have to be consistent, because if you consistently do the wrong thing, you're giving me information that I can use to make decisions. If we're picking a strategy and you execute it faithfully and it doesn't work, then I know what doesn't work, and that's a big help to me. So do we want that to be the case? No, we want everything to work perfectly the first time.
Right, but that's not always true. Some things happen.
So, maybe we throw 65% out there and we get a very, very modest increase of strength. Like, okay. So generally you're not going to just train 65% and then go up. You're probably going to train in different ranges, but it really just depends on how you're progressing. If you are working with like a progressive overload kind of thing, and you're doing more, kind of straight sets like that, then maybe you will start at 65% until you realize it doesn't work. So the stuff like that, you've got anywhere between 65 and 100, and you're not going to want to have a lot of touches at 100, because you're going to exhaust yourself. There's more risk of injury, and there's more recovery time. So anywhere in those ranges you can play with, but this is an example of where science can be helpful, because it's very simple to manipulate and use. You can play with these percentages. The result is binary. Whatever your key performance indicator is it improving? Yes, then keep doing what you're doing until it stops working, or until you think it's going to stop working. And if it's not, then you can say, oh, well, maybe we need more load. And then maybe you're still not really getting great results, and then maybe the answer isn't more load. Maybe it's more volume or something like that. But we're getting information, and these are science-backed principles that are very easy to use and very easy to manipulate, and you can verify them very quickly.
Yeah, and kettlebells conveniently go in 12, 16, 24, 28, 32, very simple math.
Yep.
And are you saying, and I think we could put this to bed, are you saying that it's impossible to do 110% of your maximum?
No, would never say that.
Okay. Nothing's impossible. All right. And then finally, I want to talk a little bit about something that's well known in science and exercise, and that's our energy systems. Let's touch on the energy systems, particularly, and this is something you get a lot with kettlebells. You've seen it. I've seen it. We've lamented about this. In fact, we have another episode where it dives into it even deeper, but the idea that, I'm doing a kettlebell swing, so I'm developing power. Energy requires energy. That's profound, Roger. Who's the science one now? But we basically have three energy systems, right? You have your phosphagen, your oxidative, and your glycolytic. So oxidative is going to be your aerobic system, which is the long bouts of swinging probably, or something like that. And then your glycolytic is your anaerobic, which is common in kettlebell training. And then of course the power training comes from that phosphagen, your ATP. So let's talk about it.
Okay.
I want to get stronger. Where am I looking?
Well, if you want to get stronger, then put down your kettlebells and go lift a barbell.
All right, I want to get better at kettlebells, general fitness. Hey, look, I think that's true, Roger. I will say this. I do some barbell training here and there, and I'm doing some now. But I do primarily kettlebells, and I feel like I'm a pretty strong guy, stronger than most.
In all seriousness, this is an upcoming episode, because yes,
okay.
You will, if you only have one thing that you can do, and you have the time and the space to do it, then barbells will be more effective at strength. But kettlebells can get you very strong. And
Yeah.
I have lots of examples of that in my own training and your training and other people. So, in all seriousness, when the thing that I find the energy systems are most relevant to is when people are doing their ballistic training. Okay, and usually, the argument is this is what kettlebells do the best. Is they say, oh well, they're great for power training, and there's nothing else that I'm aware of that you can swing the same way.
Right.
Olympic lifts are fantastic, but you can't swing a barbell, and they're different mechanics, and it does different things. So the kettlebell swings are great for doing specific things to your body. But you say, oh, why are you doing that? Oh, I'm power training. Okay, well, I'm doing 10 sets of 10. Oh, okay. Yeah, no, I'm doing an EMOM. Like, whoa, hold on. So, what is your objective? Oh, I want to be able to swing this thing as hard and as fast as I can. So, using science-based training, we know with just a little bit of information about energy systems, that's completely wrong. Okay. Not to mention the fact that the kettlebell they're using is probably too heavy. So
Yeah, but it
that's
doesn't look good if it's not
sure.
obscenely heavy, Roger.
So when we get in, we go back to the physics thing. Then we understand the inverse relationship between mass and acceleration. And if you're looking to accelerate something maximally, then the more mass you have, the harder that's going to be. And yes, you're training to eventually keep your acceleration static while increasing the mass. That's great, but there's going to be a trade-off. There's going to be a point where you're not going to be able to do that. So unless you drop the size of the bell, your bell's going to slow down. So you're not going to be accelerating as effectively. Okay, but when we get into just the energy systems, 10 seconds is probably generous when we're talking about maximum effort bouts, right?
Yeah.
So a lot of people think you don't even have that long. So if you're telling me that I'm doing these maximum, I'm really putting everything into this, what they call maximum intent. I'm working out as hard as I possibly can. And I'm trying to move this thing as quickly as possible. Then you're not going to be doing it longer than 10. So if you're telling me do a set of 10, which takes at least 20 seconds, then I know you've blown that off. And then of course you get into the replenishment. Okay, your work to rest ratio, right? You're going to need
Hmm.
to rest a long time. So an EMOM isn't going to cut it. Now, can you do a 10 sets of 10 to improve conditioning? Sure. Muscular endurance, no problem. But you're not power training. And these are the things that we're talking about. This is understanding a little bit of just basic information on what power or what energy systems work and when, understanding that the first one cuts off after about 10 seconds. The second one probably cuts off after about 2 minutes, maybe even less, right?
Yeah, I think a
Um,
little less, but yeah.
and then the third one should be allowed. You should be allowed to use that for a long time, which I really don't think you can do that long with kettlebells.
No, it's sort of challenging. I mean, unless well, at least specifically with the hard style, it gets kind of hard. That's why the snatch test is right around 5 minutes because it's going to
Sure.
be really an upper range. All right. Well, I think the brief touching on that is good. There's certainly more to all this, all these aspects of training. But if you just take this episode and you think about the physics behind what you're trying to do, what you specifically need to change, determine the weight using the percentages, and then tap into the right energy system, you're going to get results. And I would guarantee it, but we don't do guarantees here, folks. So, because that's too absolute. No, but in seriousness, science says if you try that and it doesn't work, try something else, and it might work. Right? Isn't
Well,
that the
and
definition?
that's probably the best approach. So science is helpful. It has a lot of shortcomings. A lot of these studies that people reference, they really are not going to apply to you. They're just one piece of the puzzle. And a lot of people don't even really understand what science is about. Science is about testing things over and over and over again, and then building a kind of complete picture of things. Exercise science is very new relative to other sciences. So when we get into, lifting weights, that hasn't been a thing for very long. And then when we get into, like, notice we haven't really spoken specifically about kettlebell studies because there are barely any. The ones I reference really are talking about the things like the vertical nature of the swing, the kinematics or how force, kinetics, how force is actually produced, right? This is relevant to teaching, and this is something that we've seen through the studies. But a lot of the kettlebell studies, it's like, I think one was done with a 12, these were like college age kids, which most of the studies are done on, swinging a grown male in college swing, a 12 kilo bell with two hands. Is like, this is silly. Like, they're not studying me with, yeah.
I mean, it's every magazine ad or every kettlebell ad is some burly guy, way stronger or way more physically lookingly. Anyway, he looks way stronger than I do, and he's got a dumbass 12.
Yeah, and this is consistent with the study. So we're not talking about those kettlebell studies because we really haven't done any. But that would be interesting to see. Doing ladder training. Is ladder training effective? How often you can do it? Because I know ladder training works for some people, works for me, it's worked for you, it's worked for a lot of my clients, but it goes against a lot of the studies and a lot of the literature. So what's to, there are a lot of things that you could use to explain it, but if you just go by, the whole science of it, you're going to look into kettlebell training and say, oh, well, that doesn't work. It's like, well, it does work, and for some people it's a great tool, and it's a great solution to a lot of problems, and that's kind of where we want to be. So if you can back your training or your coaching on just some basic foundational ideas like physics, okay, keeping, reducing the exercises that you do to movement qualities, so you can be specific, not with mimicry, but with very specific stimulus, and you can work with things like energy systems. You're going to be able to start making intelligent decisions, and you're going to say, wait a second, my training hasn't really been very effective, and this is why. There are some other things that we can mention too, but those are some of the big ones with kettlebells, and that's why we chose to bring those up.
Yeah, and if you are curious whether you need to have a program that gets granular like this, or if you just need to work out, check out episode 2, where we talk about if a program is right for you. And when you start combining that decision with the decisions you make based on what we talked about today, you're probably going to feel really good about your training, and it's going to be less about, oh, I saw this on the web, I'm going to do it, or ChatGPT provided me this workout and I'm going to do it. But you'll actually do something that benefits your body, and of course, listen to your body. And that's not really science, though. That's just like feeling. Anyways, if we go on any further, I feel we're going to hurt people's feelings. So, Roger, do you got anything else?
No, I'm good.
All right. He's good. I'm good. And be sure to download our app, Bells, on the Apple App Store. And, hey, if you want a program, they're in there. Science-backed. Thanks for listening, everybody, and stay strong.